So recently, an interview with John Justice, the vice president of Stadia, has revealed some really juicy info on the future of Stadia and what we'll expect going forward from Stadia themselves. Things like what we'll see with the future of games on the platform and when we might start to see more exclusives, the pricing model and how that might take shape, and one of the biggest things that people really want to know, what about Gen 2 Stadia, or Stadia improving its hardware in the future? And I actually have my own sources and information that I want to share with you guys on that, so stick around. And the last thing is just the general future of what they want Stadia to be. Guys, it was a pretty revealing interview into the mindset of where Stadia's direction will go in the future. We'll talk and cover what was said in this interview. With that, please hit that red subscribe button to join one of the fastest growing Stadia and cloud gaming channels in all of YouTube, and consider hitting that like button. So before we start, the interview where this took place will be down below in the description, so feel free to check this out yourselves. That link will be there. So I've been wanting to make this video for quite some time now. I've sat on this information for a few months, and guys, if I'm being honest, I'm pretty new to all this, being someone who gets to know things from the inside a little bit and all that jazz. It's really foreign to me. But one question I do get all the time is about Stadia's hardware and it improving. The buzzword that gets used a lot in this community, if you're new, is Gen 2, and this gets referred to what is the second generation of Stadia's hardware. This news was first broken by a fellow YouTuber and friend of the channel in StadiaCast many months ago, but I've actually heard some information on how this all works, and it's not quite like how we think. And in this interview by John Justice, he essentially confirmed what my source had been telling me for quite some time. Let's take a listen.
With the next gen consoles now launched and ray tracing and all that becoming like it's pretty much standard feature in games, are you guys looking to upgrade Stadia's tech to kind of keep up with that?
And we are working on continually improving the servers, again in the spirit of delight people as things come.
Right.
We're doing a lot of work on the servers to make them faster in different ways, whether it's in continuing to make game load times better. We're the fastest or right up there with the fastest things you can get. That's the nice thing about cloud service, that we can just swap in and just add in new components and new servers over time. So we are definitely working on upgrading every part of it, but you won't see us talking about much of it before it lands.
So John goes on to say that we can swap in new components and new servers. Now, from what I've been told, Stadia's setup isn't just like this one machine that is considered Gen 1, and then there's this separate machine called Gen 2 that is more powerful, and that it's not as simple as swapping and upgrading one for the other, but this is more of an infrastructure that is constantly being upgraded, potentially part by part like John Justice mentioned, and we as the gamers are plugged into this big infrastructure. So for example, my source mentioned developers can request more GPU power or more CPU power if they desire in their development of their Stadia game that they're making. And a good example of this is a game that was told to me in Football Manager 2 on Stadia as a game that used a lot more CPU power than most games due to all the simulations that game does run in the background. So that definitely made a lot of sense. So I guess in conclusion, what I'm trying to say with all this Gen 2 stuff is that it's like a buzz term that may actually be 100% real and used to help people like myself understand all this junk a little bit better. But my source had talked specifically to several people, two of them working on developing games right now on Stadia, and another from Google themselves who worked on Stadia a year ago, and they just never heard of such a term. So I'm not really saying that Gen 2 isn't real. Maybe it's more of a marketing term for us to better understand when Stadia does finally get upgrades, and hopefully I didn't lose anybody there. And if I'm being honest, taking this interview just at face value and not knowing what I know, I feel it's safe to say that if I happen to be wrong here, it's still pretty similar to what John has already described, as well as Phil Harrison a year ago when he mentioned how games can utilize multiple GPUs to run their title.
The fundamental benefit of our cloud-native infrastructure is that developers will be able to take advantage of hardware and power in ways never before possible. And that includes taking advantage of the power of multiple GPUs at once.
And this insane hardware will have parts that will just be getting swapped in that'll improve it. The tech itself will just continue to improve as time goes on. And the real kicker, and what I feel, guys, is the most important thing to take away from this portion of the interview, is that we aren't ever going to know when these upgrades on Stadia's hardware actually happens until you actually see them live in a game. So for example, when we start to see ray traced graphics appearing. Also, Stadia mentioned that down the line you'll see things like 8K and 120 FPS. This was mentioned about a year ago. I feel personally, and this is my opinion, that this is the right way to go. Let the games speak for themselves for what they can do, because it is up to the developers on how much they can squeeze out of this hardware. And while Stadia can assist with helping them get the most out of it, at the end of the day, it's not Stadia developing the actual games that these publishers and developers are dropping. Granted, we can argue that the Stadia platform can hold them to higher standards, but at this point, that's not what this video is about. All in all, guys, I feel as the future of Stadia goes forward, we start to see these upgrades on the hardware happening on the back end, and the games are improving visually, running better, loading faster, that we are essentially on a platform with easily some of the highest, and I mean this, some of the highest potential, and it's pretty mind-blowing when you sit back and you think about it. This has been fun stuff, and I can't wait to see how this continues to progress. Alright, so with all that, let's talk about the rest of the interview, which was pretty telling in quite a few things, guys. John was asked about exclusives, and he essentially said you're going to see more information on exclusive Stadia games from the partner studios like Harmonix and Supermassive more soon than you will from games made by these studios in Montreal and Playa Vista, which are headed by Jade Raymond, which I'm guessing are the more ambitious cloud-only titles, which, if I'm being honest, was a bit of a slight bummer, as I think for Stadia to really get to that next level, it will come from cloud only exclusives, and we might still have a ways to go before we see any of those. Hopefully though, we do get a teaser sometime next year on what they are actually working on. Another thing that I want to go ahead and point out was he said about games in general, and he talked about working with a few hundred studios on bringing games over to Stadia. We also heard something similar from Jack Buser, director of games for Stadia, that 400 titles are set to come from here until 2022, and that they are already planning out 2023 already. So it makes sense that a few hundred studios are on board working with Stadia right now. Last things on games that he mentioned is something that he is extremely aware of, that people are crying out for more and more games. That is mostly what we as gamers want to see more than anything else on Stadia, and that they are working hard on that aspect, which you can tell they are doing because they are over-delivering on giving us more games. This year, earlier in the year, they had announced we were only getting 100 games. This was back in January. They've overextended that now, and they are close to 135 here by the end of 2020. So you can tell they are definitely listening. Pivoting this conversation though, another thing that I want to go ahead and note that he talked about was he mentioned they are working with internet service providers on either eliminating data caps altogether or at least improving it to where we have a better experience. That was really good to hear. He also mentioned support for Android on TVs and that they are working very, very hard on getting that going. And we also did hear that some time ago that was planned to come in 2021. Another segment that was talked about was the pricing model, and that they are taking player feedback on this. They are completely aware that there is a segment of gamers that want a Netflix style, which is why you see Stadia Pro includes so many games, as they ramped up just from having 2 when Stadia first launched to now we're getting almost 5 or 6 games on a monthly basis. Also in that conversation was Ubisoft Plus continuing to potentially add subscription types of models that people would be clamoring for if they're looking for that Netflix style, but at the same time going ahead and providing options to just outright buy the game and not pay any sort of subscription fee. This was really good to hear, and I'm very glad that they are focused on hearing player feedback. And the last thing that I want to touch on is part of their future development of this platform is apparently going to come in more of the YouTube side of things. I'm guessing what he meant by this is more things like crowd play and crowd choice, but maybe even more immersive types of features like this in the future. Of course, that is just pure speculation on my end, but it was curious that YouTube will continue to play a heavy part in Stadia's future. Overall, some of the biggest takeaways from this interview have to be a few things. One, they will no longer telegraph ahead of time on features, and they're just going to let us know when they're ready. 2, they are trying to make the whole process of Stadia itself faster in and out of games, faster load times, make everything as instant as possible, all the while being more and more accessible on more devices like Android TV, and bringing as many games as possible overall. Those were the biggest takeaway that I got from this, guys, and I have to say, if you do follow the last 6 months of how things have been going with Stadia, they have been delivering on all the things he's mentioned. I, for one, am more excited than I ever was before in Stadia. The more and more that I get to learn, the more I'm pretty happy to see that they've learned from their mistakes and that they are improving and they are working on getting the absolute best product and cloud gaming platform they can. Alright guys, there was a crap ton of information on this video, so please let me know your thoughts on everything that was talked about in this video. What are you guys feeling on Stadia's hardware? What are your feelings on Stadia's future? Are you guys liking where everything's going? And if you could do me a huge favor and please hit that like button, it's so helpful. I'd really appreciate it, and subscribe for more Stadia videos as I do make daily content. I'm Sunny, and like always, I'll see you guys in the cloud.